Hey there, Wargamers, Justin the Art Painter here from Death Ray Designs, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to approach painting angel wings. The wings we're going to be working on today are from the Sanguinary Guard kit from the Warhammer 40k Blood Angels line. Now I'm going to be showing you guys during today's tutorial how to get a transition or a gradient on the wings with an airbrush, and then an alternative approach to doing the wings by hand and getting a completely different effect. Both are viable, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to do both. We've gone ahead and primed this piece today, but we're going to need some paints to come in and do the effects. For that, we need Nuln Oil, Drakendorf Nightshade from Citadel as well. For Military, we'll be using Rock, as well as Base Gray. We'll be using our Montana Shock White as well. And as an optional, we're going to come in with some acrylic white paint from Vallejo. Any white paint you have will do. Now this is optional because it depends on where you stop with today's tutorial. Now we've already pre-primed our wings today, but we're going to come in with our Minotaur Rock, and we're going to start pushing in the shadows and the depth in these wings. With our Minotaur Rock now applied and dry, it's time to come in with our Base Gray. Now it's important to note we want to stay away from these areas right here, where the shadows are meant to be with the wings. We want to have that transition from the darker gray to the lighter gray, so we're going to be focusing on the areas of the wings where that transition is going to be. So make sure you get the angle right with the miniature. Sometimes it's easier to move the miniature to get a better angle of attack with your paint than it is to move your paintbrush. In this case, I've angled the wings, and you can see as I'm spraying with this downward angle, I'm leaving some of that darker gray transitioning to this lighter gray. Now getting the next layer of wings that are above the long ones, the ones in the middle here, are going to be a little bit harder to get to, so you're going to have to use a little bit of precision. If you're not comfortable doing this with your airbrush, you could come in with a little bit of masking, some silly putty or liquid masking or something like that to really get this crisp transition. But a little bit of practice, and I'm confident you can do it. With our base gray now applied and dry, it's time to come in with our shock white. Now we're going to be focusing on the same type of principles and techniques that we did before, in that we're trying to push this gradient, this transition. So where we applied our rock, transitioning into base gray, we're now transitioning into white. So we want to focus on the bottom areas, the extreme areas, and preserve that gradient. As you can see here, I'm focusing on the bottom areas of this portion of the wing, and you can see that transition from white into gray, and you get that nice gradient, that nice shadow, which is exactly what we're trying to do here with the airbrush. Remember, go slow with this, be patient, apply multiple coats as necessary. And this is an area where you can adjust the gradient to your liking as well. I generally like to have that bright white into a pretty rapid transition, as you can see here, but if you want to have more gray present, then just focus your white more on the tip and leave more of that gray present between the layers. Just like with our previous step, when we come to approach the next row of feathers here, we want to be as precise as possible. Sometimes overspray is okay, but in this case we really don't want to hit the stark gray that's on the underside of this row of feathers. That is where our shadow is, and if you hit that with the white, you're going to lose this whole transition that we've been building. So be patient with this, go slow, apply multiple layers as necessary, and if you're really not confident with your airbrush control, come in with a little bit of silly putty or liquid masking. With our white applied, it's time to let this dry, but as I said before, if your white's not quite as intense as you want, just let it dry and apply another coat. In this case, I think this looks pretty good, so we're going to move on. With our white now dry, we're going to come in with some Liquitex gloss varnish and varnish up these wings. Because the Montana paint tends to bleed if it gets wet or you do any other effects on top of it, I'm going to go ahead and seal this. Now in this particular state here, you could stop after the varnish is applied, or you could even apply a matte varnish if you prefer a matte finish. In this case, we're going to be applying some extra effects, so that gloss varnish is actually going to end up being matte in the end anyway. That said, I think these wings look really great, and if you want to stop here and you're happy with the effects you got with the airbrush, that's perfectly fine. This looks great. For the remainder of this tutorial, however, we are going to be focusing on some techniques that are applied by hand. With our gloss varnish now dry, we can come in for the next step. Now, as I said before, these wings are perfectly fine here if you want to stop and you just want to do the airbrush effect, but moving forward, we're going to be utilizing some hand-painted techniques. For that, we're going to come in with our Nuln Oil. We're going to wash one of these wings. Now, I have thinned this down, 7 parts matte varnish to 1 part Nuln Oil. You could even thin this down with gloss varnish if you want to get some different effects across the gloss surface that we've already varnished down. The sky really is the limit, so just play around with your washes, but in this case, we're going to be using some thinned down Nuln Oil with matte varnish. The other wash we'll be using is Drakendorf Nightshade. I've also thinned that down, 7 parts matte varnish to 1 part Drakendorf Nightshade, and in both cases I've thrown in 1 drop of Flow Improver for good measure. Now you may be asking yourself, why have I thinned down a black wash and a blue wash? And that is because we're going to be applying one of those washes to one wing and one to the other. I want to showcase how simply by using a different color wash you can get a different effect on the wings. Now this does come down to a personal preference, what you like and what you think is going to look best. So in this case I'm going to be able to show you guys what a black or gray looking wash is going to look like across these wings, and then on the other side what a blue wash is going to look like. Make the choice based on what you think looks best. Alright, so we're going to come in here with our Nuln Oil mix and apply a generous amount to our left wing. Remember, just like you do with any other application of wash, don't allow it to pool too thick in any one area. While it's still wet, you can come in with your paintbrush and use the capillary action to sop up some of that wash and get some of it out of the recesses. If you're not quite happy, come in here with a little bit more while it's wet and really address those recesses and make it look great. While our Nuln Oil is drying, we're going to come in here with our thinned down Drakendorf Nightshade and apply this blue wash to the other wing. Now obviously you wouldn't have 2 different color wings on any one miniature, or maybe you would, I don't know, maybe you're doing some Zinc stuff. But in this case, again, I really just want to showcase for you guys what each wash is going to look like on each individual wing. So you can make the choice based on what's going to look best for your miniatures and your personal preference. With both of our washes now applied, we just need to allow this to dry and we can come back in for our next step. With our washes now dry, we can begin the next step. Now, in its current state, if you like this, you could stop right here. There's no reason to go above and beyond unless you want to make things death ray difficult, which you guys are used to me doing. For the next step, we're going to be approaching these wings from a glazing / edge highlighting perspective. This particular step can take forever, so be patient and really work each individual feather up until you get a consistency and a color / intensity of white that you like. We're going to start by targeting the edges of the feathers here and really bring up the white again. Now I've thinned down my white paint. It is very thin and I'm going to be applying multiple layers. Like I said before, this is going to take a good considerable amount of time. When you're doing this, you want to make sure you don't go all the way down to the recess, however, and with each successive layer of paint that you apply, you want to leave some of the previous layer showing through if you can. Essentially what you're doing is hand building up gradients on each one of these feathers individually. So if you happen to stop at the previous step with the wash, or maybe even if you stopped with the airbrushing step, that makes perfect sense because like I said, this is going to take forever. But if you're looking for something that's going to give you a little bit more detail and look a little bit better on the tabletop, this is definitely going to show the effort and the amount of time that you put into it. As you approach the top portions of the wings here, this is a lot less like an edge highlight and more like a wash or glaze. So you're going to apply this really ultra thin down white and kind of drag it and pull it in a way that looks good to you. You want to leave some of that gray showing through. And while this is still wet, you can come in with your paintbrush and maneuver the paint around, or if you get it too dense, you can come in with your paintbrush when it's cleaned off and move some of that paint, get it back off of the miniature here, which is what we're doing here, to kind of try and blend the paint out and move it around. Like I said, you don't want to cover all the gray, you want to have that transition from gray into white. So basically what you're doing here is all the transitions by hand that you would be trying to do with an airbrush, but with this you get a lot more detail and you can get really specific with the areas that you're targeting. Stuff that's really, really hard to do with an airbrush at this scale. As we approach the blue tinted wings here, we're going to follow the exact same process we did on the other side. We're going to come in with our thin white paint and apply it like a glaze or an edge highlight or a little bit of both. And we're going to really layer this up until we're happy with the intensity or the consistency of the paint that we've got down. Remember, multiple thin coats is absolutely necessary for this step, but you can keep applying this really thin down white in multiple layers until you get an intensity you like. This can take, again, a long amount of time. It really just depends how much time you want to put into layering these colors up. One thing I will say as a word of advice is to not rush this. Don't use really thick white paint or you might ruin this. If you're going to approach your wings from this perspective, expect to spend a bunch of time, but you're going to get some really nice, interesting effects for your efforts. Just like on the other wing, when we come in here to approach the top, we're going to apply this ultra thin down white and glaze it on. Maneuver it around. Remember, the last place that your paintbrush touches is where the paint pigment is going to be the most intense. So you can use that to your advantage when you're trying to really push these highlights and get this transition. Again, don't rush this. Make sure your paint is very, very thin when you're applying this step. You want to be using something that's probably along the consistency of milk. And so long as the paint is still wet on the surface and you haven't allowed it to dry too much, you can come in with a cleaned paintbrush and start moving some of that paint around and trying to get some of that gray to show back through. This is an exercise in patience. You want to put multiple layers down and really work the colors in and build up to those highlights. Be patient with this, don't rush it, have some fun, and make some interesting looking wings. I've gone ahead and applied a layer of white here to the backs of the wings, and as you can see, it's very subtle and not quite as intense as I would like. For the sake of time, I've went ahead and done a second coat or second pass across the tops of the wings here, and you can really see the difference. You can see on the back here it's very dull, very subdued, and simply by going in with a second pass, we've got these nice bright white edges on the tips of these wings. Now if you want to spend a bunch of time, you can come in and do this as many times as you like to get the intensity where you would like, but for today I think this really illustrates and explains what you would need to do to get these wings looking great. So I'm going to go ahead and come in with a couple more passes on my own, and I'll be back with what our finished product's going to look like. And there we go. With some additional glazing and some edge highlights, I think our wings are looking great. I think this is interesting because I've been able to show you guys what the wings will look like with more of a black or gray tone, as well as a blue tone. Now, as I said in the previous steps, you could stop with the airbrush steps if you've got some consistency or a transition that you like, but if you're going to try and work into something that's got a little bit more detail, something that's maybe a centerpiece for your army or something for competition, this effect is something that you can do, and you can do this without an airbrush if you try. The sky really is the limit. It's just a matter of how much time do you want to spend glazing and working up your colors, and maybe if you want to come in for a little bit extra detail, you could come in and push some of those shadows manually by hand as well. Again, the sky is the limit. Make sure you're having fun with this and make some awesome wings for your miniatures. Alright, with our washes now dry and our edge highlights complete, I think we're going to call this piece done. It's important to note that you can continue layering up and adding more and more depth to these miniatures, but the purpose of today's tutorial is more to give you guys the foundation and the tools to learn how to do this. The sky really is the limit of what you guys decide you want to do. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like and subscribe, ding that little bell so you get alerts when we put up new content. And if there's anything you'd like to talk to us about, if there's something we could do to improve, any questions about what we did today or suggestions on what we could do in the future, content-wise, technique-wise, or ministries you'd like to see us work on, sound off in the comments below. We'd love to interact with you guys, and we're committed to improving and making sure we're putting out the best possible content we can. Who better to let us know that than you guys, the ones that already interact and view the videos. If you happen to use any of these techniques on your miniatures and you'd like to showcase those photos with us, consider joining our Facebook group, the TAP Garrison, where you can interact with all the DRD team members, including myself, as well as other like-minded individuals who happen to like painting and gaming. If you'd like to help support the channel, make sure you check out deathrodesigns.com. Anything you do over there helps keep the lights on, helps keep me employed so I can continue to produce content for you guys, which I love to do. I'd like to thank you guys again for hanging out with me today. I've enjoyed doing these tutorials so far, and hopefully you've enjoyed watching them, maybe listen to me ramble, or maybe even learn something along the way. As always, happy wargaming, keep on painting, and I will see you guys during the next video.